In the first talk, we had an understanding day by day experiences in our life and how our experiences shapes my day-to-day working, my thought, my speech and action. Today, we will try to understand how our experiences, perceptions, and knowledge build our conventional I. That I is the letter I. Or, normally in Eastern wisdom, we say it is a false I, based on our experiences, perceptions, and the knowledge. We are not able to see and perceive the reality behind it, and that is why the Eastern wisdom helps us to identify uh, the conventional I as compared to the real I. What are your experiences of likes and dislikes, pain and pleasure, happiness and unhappiness, frustration, failure, and success? In the midst of all these perceptions and experiences, there is a real self, and that is why I said mine and the real self. Self knowledge is the way to be permanent happiness. I do not know who I am, but I continue to declare false I as a real I. Until I recognize who the real I will continue to suffer before human birth comes to an end. Study Eastern wisdom to know the real I before the human birth comes to an end. Study Eastern wisdom to know the real I. I do not know. I do not know who I am, yet I declare the false I, a fleeting shadow, as my truth. And in this grand deception, my suffering, my suffering finds no end. Before the human birth comes to an end, study Eastern wisdom to know the real I. Until the real I unveiled and known shines forth within, this pain will cling, a constant, heavy friend. Before the human birth comes to an end, study Eastern wisdom to know the real I. Before this human birth departs, before the final curtain falls, let Eastern wisdom guide my heart to find the real I. Before the human birth comes to an end, study Eastern wisdom to know the real I. That is a simple logical statement made by the Eastern wisdom. Why don't you do the self-inquiry to find out who you are? Why you take for granted who you are? Why I take for granted why I am? It is because of my perception, knowledge, and understanding coming from the world outside. We need to understand in this comprehensive discussion, we are dissecting the foundational statement. We know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experiences. We will rigorously examine each component, starting with the raw sensory input, moving through the mind's immediate interpretation, that is what we call perception, Through accumulation of these perceptions into lived moment, we call it as an experience. And finally, the formulation of enduring belief and narratives about ourselves, which we call knowledge. It is an important factor that we should explore the dynamic, cyclical relationship between these elements, showing how they constantly influence and reinforce one another. Furthermore, we will analyze the inherent truth in the statement I perceive, I know, and I experience. Where is the inherent truth? I is the common factor in I perceive, I know, and I experience. What is that common factor? How to know that I? Should I know it with reference to my perception, with reference to the knowledge that I have accumulated, with reference to the experience, or that I is beyond all my perceptions of the world, knowledge, and experience? Why we should discuss the motivation behind this deep dive is to illuminate the intricate mechanics of self identity. I'm using another word, self identity. So I have a perception, I have a self identity, I have an experience and accumulation. There is a self identity. By understanding how our self is built upon these core processes, we gain an invaluable insight into why we react the way we do, why certain beliefs about ourselves persist, and how our internal states, like nervousness or irritation or pleasure or pain, are formed and maintained. Discussion is crucial for anyone seeking to understand the nature of our own mind and behind what lies. So that will help us to to understand mind and the real self. Through this analysis, we will arrive at a clearer understanding that our conventional self is not a static entity, but a dynamic, ever evolving mental construct. You will see how specific examples from our own lives, such as feeling nervous, struggling with the sleep, or experiencing irritation, or enjoying the pleasure with reference to the world outside, not just isolated incident, but are intricately woven into the fabric of our self perception, knowledge, and ongoing experiences. We will trace the journey from a momentary sensation to a solidified belief about who we are. Why it will benefit us to instead of feeling controlled by our self definition, we can begin to observe them more objectively. That is why the lot of practices are there in Eastern wisdom, that how you separate the objective from the subjective reality. And at the same time, then we will be able to challenge our limiting belief by seeing how knowledge about ourselves is formed. We can question its absolute truth and potentially reshape it. We will also have a greater self awareness. We can cultivate higher self awareness, a deeper appreciation for the interplay of perception, knowledge, and experience. That interplay can enhance our ability to understand our own reactions and emotional states. I'm going beyond the modern psychology, and we open the door to transformation when we realize our real self is not fixed, when we realize our conventional self is not fixed. I'm adding the Eastern wisdom. The real self is always fixed instead. it creates an opportunity to consciously influence how we perceive, learn, and experience. And that will help ultimately to a more adaptable and resilient sense of identity. That is what the real self is. We know ourselves by, that is very clear. In the first talk, I covered that we know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experiences. We hit upon the we have hit on a crucial point that ties together our previous discussion. We know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experience. How we conventionally know ourselves? By perception. Simple way, by perception. Who you are? Oh, I'm Michael. Who you are? You're Michelle. What you do? I'm CEO of this company. You see? Perception. So this refers to a direct sensory input and our mind's immediate interpretation. It's how we perceive our own body, our actions, and our immediate environment. So now how it forms the self-knowledge. Physical self, I recognize with the name and the form that Michael, is the CEO of this company. The Steve Jobs, and instantly mind says Apple. Window, Bill Gates. Physical self, we perceive our body through sight, looking in a mirror, touch, and awareness of our body's position in the space. I have a brown hair, I am tall, I feel tired, I exhausted. I'm referring to the physical body as I am. And the same thing happens. We perceive our emotional state, internal emotional state. I feel happy. What? I am tall and I feel happy. Are these two statements refers to the I? In one case, it is purely the physical gray matter. In other case, it is volatile happiness. So, are you both? So there, the conventional I causes lot of problem. Everyone takes for granted. I feel nervous. This is a direct internal perception. One is the physical perception and other is the internal perception. So are we cheating ourselves by declaring the two selves? We perceive ourselves performing actions. Third one, I'm walking. Come on. I am tall, physical self. I feel happy, emotional state, and I'm walking the action. How the three can go together? That seems to be paradox, contradictory. So when you notice a low-grade nervous feeling, that's a direct perception of an internal state. And this perception contributes to our momentary self-assessment. I am feeling nervous. So that is what I gave a brief idea about the perception. And what about the knowledge? So knowledge, obviously based on my perception and experience. So this encompasses the accumulated information, facts, belief, and understanding we hold about ourselves. This knowledge is often derived from the past experiences, social interactions, and intellectual conclusions. All basis is the perception. So how this self-knowledge forms? Maybe because of the personal history, memories of what we have done, where we have been, our successes and failures. I graduated from college. I used to live in Arizona, like this. So that is the first it forms. The second factor is the roles and labels. The roles we play in life, parent, friend, employee, boss, and the labels we apply to ourselves, introvert, optimist, creative. I am good problem solver, I am a shy person, etc., etc. The third factor that forms the knowledge is our belief about the self. Belief is again based on my perception experience. Our core belief about our capabilities, our worth and identity. I'm capable, I'm not good enough, today is the bad morning, etc. Another factor that forms the knowledge is the external feedback. What others tell us about ourselves. Oh, you are so kind. You are very organized. Ah, you are crazy or you are smart. So if our mind forms the narrative, I'm a bad sleeper, that becomes a part of my knowledge about myself. And ultimately, then I have a disturbed sleep. So my belief, my role, my personal history, my external feedback causes all these problems. We are still in the early phases of understanding. This knowledge then influences my future perception and experiences related to sleep. So we covered the two parts, the perception and the knowledge, now experience. So experience refers to the actual living through actual living through of events, interactions, and internal states over time. We can safely say experiences are raw materials from which perception and knowledge are derived and continuously updated. So, how the self uh, trial and error, how it forms the self knowledge by experience, trial and error, learning what we like and dislike. So, but again, like and dislike comes from the mind, and the real self is behind the mind. So learning what we like and dislike, what we are good and bad by doing the things. I experienced failure at the task, so I know I need more practice. Trial and error. Emotional responses, repeated responses of joy, sorrow, frustration, happiness teach us about our emotional landscape. No doubt they teach us, but still we are too far from the real self. We create a conventional self. I always feel drained after large social gatherings. So I know I'm an introvert person. But I am an introvert. Why I give label to a mental state? Where is the real I? So these are the two trial and error and the emotional responses. And third is the relationship. Our interactions with others shape our self perception. I learned I am a compassionate when I helped a friend in need. Like this, we make a lot of statements like this. So the repeated experiences of restlessness at night and waking up tired leads to a perception of bad sleep. And that bad sleep, my mind keeps on repeating, and then I have a disturbed sleep, which then solidifies into a knowledge I am a bad sleeper. The constant nervousness is a recurring experience that reinforces a self perception. I am a bad sleeper. I perceive, I know, and I experience. Always true or not, that needs to be examined. If it is true, why and how? And if no, why and how? What I said, I perceive, I know, and I experience. Always true or not? If they are true, why and how? If no, why and how? Isn't it fascinating to delve into the fundamental nature of perception, knowledge, and experience? Let's break down into I perceive, I know, and I experience. Always true or not? If yes, why and how? If no, why and how? So we get a clarity about it. Eastern wisdom always says self inquiry. You have to inquire. And we have to find the cause and effect, put in the right reason. So before analyzing the always true aspect, let's establish what we mean by these terms with some everyday examples. Perceive. This refers to the process of becoming aware of something through our senses. Am I right? It may be sight. You perceive a red car driving by. Sound. You perceive the ringing of your phone. Touch, you perceive the warmth of a mug of a coffee. Smell, you perceive the scent of a freshly baked bread. Taste, you perceive the sweetness of an apple. So now come to the internal perception. You perceive a feeling of hunger or the position of your body in the space. So what is thing to be known? This implies having information, understanding, being aware of the facts or the truth. Knowledge can be acquired through various means. It may be by perception, learning, reasoning, testimony. Pay attention. So, learning, factual knowledge, you know that 2 plus 2 is 4. Procedural knowledge, you know how to ride a bicycle. Experiential knowledge, you know that touching a hot stove will burn you. Conceptual knowledge, you know what justice means. You cannot see the justice. So this refers to the act of undergoing or living through something, often leading to personal involvement in learning. Experience can be passive or active. So experience, it may be sensory experience. You experience the vibrant colors of the sunset. Emotional experience, that normally people say internal. You experience the joy after a success. Social experience, you experience a conversation with a friend. Learning experience, you experience the challenge of solving a complex problem. Physical experience, you experience the sensation of running a marathon. Now analyze. Analysis, I perceive, I know, and I experience, always true or not. Now we are going to. So, first thing is that the statement I perceive, I know, I experience is always true in a fundamental sense. As long as this I, refers to a conscious living being. Not anything, not attached, no identification. So the why and how lie in the very definition and the nature of the consciousness and existence, my friend. Then why it is always true for a conscious being? Why it is always true? Let us examine all the three: perception, experience, and knowledge. Perception is the fundamental to interaction with the reality. Why? For a being to exist in and interact with its environment, it must have some form of perception. Even the simplest organisms perceive stimuli, maybe stimuli from the light or chemicals or the temperature or the touch, to survive. But for humans, our complex sensory apparatus constantly takes in information from the world around us and from within our bodies. How? Our nervous system, through our senses, is continuously processing data. We cannot not perceive something if we are awake and our senses are functioning. They are windows to the external world, 5 senses. I cannot say that I am in front of you and you don't see me. Even in sleep we perceive dreams. The act of being implies some form of input from the environment. If you weren't perceiving, you won't be able to react, learn, or even distinguish yourself from your surrounding. That is, in brief, in nutshell, is about perception. Why experiences? Well, experience is the raw materials of existence. The world has to exist to experience. But why? To be alive is to undergo experience. That is how we try to understand. Every moment of consciousness is an experience. Whether it is a thought or a feeling or a sensation or an action. Even states like boredom or inactivity are experiences. You cannot be without experiencing something. How? Experience is the flow of events and sensations through our consciousness. Here, the consciousness is an important factor. Minus consciousness, no experience, no perception, no knowledge. Is that independent? Eastern wisdom discovers it is an independent entity, and that is what the real self is. It's the subjective reality of being alive. From the simplest breath to the most profound emotional upheaval, these are all experiences that constitute our individual existence. Come to knowledge arises from the perception and experience. Why? While knowledge can be flawed or incomplete, the capacity to know and the presence of some form of knowledge are inherent to a conscious living. Are you getting it? Our perceptions and experiences are the primary ways we build our understanding of the world. We learn from what we perceive and what we experience. Even innate instincts or learned behaviors can be considered the forms of knowing how to act. How? From the birth, we begin to form a mental model of the world based on sensory input and interactions. Mental model. And behind that mental model is located the real self. I'm just giving you a clue that we are going to discuss. We learn cause and effect, experiential knowledge. We categorize objects, perceptual knowledge. We absorb information from others, socially acquired knowledge. Even when we are mistaken, we know something to be true, even if that knowledge is later revised. The very act of forming, we have to revise our knowledge about our conventional self to the real self, is the journey of the Eastern wisdom. That is what the mindfulness and meditation is. The very act of forming a thought implies the presence of some form of knowledge or information processing. But we have also to analyze and reflect upon exceptions and nuances. Why? Because why it might seem not always true, but still is fundamentally. So it leads us to error in perception. While we always perceive something, our perceptions can be distorted or lead to illusions. And we are already aware of the optical delusion, hallucinations, misinterpreting a sound. However, the act of perceiving is still occurring. Perception continues. You are perceiving the illusion even if it doesn't accurately represent the external reality, like water in the mirage water. So mistaken knowledge, we often know the things that turn out to be false. For example, for centuries, people knew the sun revolved around the earth. But even in this case, the act of knowing, believing something to be true based on available information, was present. Knowledge is dynamic and subject to revision. That is where the problem we have, the Eastern wisdom solves. There is an absolute knowledge, there is a relative knowledge. But the state of having knowledge is constant. The state of having knowledge, the state of having the knowledge of the real self is constant. And that is where the mindfulness or meditation leads us to. And then there are unconscious processes. A vast amount of what our brains do is unconscious. Regulating heartbeat, automatic behaviors, we don't perceive or experience these in a conscious way. And certainly don't know them explicitly. However, the statement refers to the conscious I. If I am conscious, then these three elements are present. Lack of specific senses is another challenge. A blind person doesn't perceive light visually, but they still perceive the world through other senses. they still perceive, know, and experience. Reflection is what our life is. Our concluding statement is what our life is. What our lives are a continuous stream of perceptions, stream of waves. We are constantly taking in information, interpreting it, and reacting to it. This shapes our understanding of our environment and our place within it. Our lives are built upon knowledge. From the moment we are born, we are acquiring and organizing information. We are reflecting on what we have understood until now. This knowledge allows us to navigate the world, solve problems, make decisions, and communicate. It forms the basis of our belief, values, and identities. That is what I'm doing. Our lives are defined by our experiences. Your life, my life, our lives are defined by every interaction, every emotion, every challenge, every joy. These are the threads of the weave, the tapestry of our existence. Our experiences shape who we are, teach us lessons, and provide the context for our perceptions and knowledge. In essence, I perceive, I know, and I experience describes the fundamental modes of being for a conscious entity. They are not separate, isolated events, but rather interconnected processes that define our conscious existence and ongoing narrative of our lives. They are the active ingredients that make us sentient, learning, and evolving beings. Continue with our reflection and underscore, or point out, if we point out the limitations of this conventional self-knowledge. While when we say limitations of conventional self-knowledge, describes how our everyday ego self is formed. That is what I refer to as a conventional I. It also implicitly highlights the limitations from the perspective of deeper Eastern wisdom traditions. How the self becomes conditional. If we know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experiences, then our self-identity becomes dependent on these fluctuating elements and streams of perceptions. And if perception changes, does our self change? My perception changes with reference to the body and the mind and the intellect and the ego, likes and dislikes. Does myself, my real self, change? Well, if our knowledge is proven wrong, our roles disappear. Do we lose ourselves? Do we lose our real self? If our experiences are predominantly negative, does that mean I'm a negative person? That is what the modern psychology is doing. This leads to an unstable, reactive sense of the self, prone to suffering when external circumstances or internal states shift. It belongs to the mind, it doesn't belong to the real self. But I take it for granted I have 10 negative thoughts and I'm a negative person. Now, the second problem with this limitation is the observer and the observed. The core belief of the spiritual journey or Eastern wisdom or self-inquiry or discovery of the self. Who is the one perceiving the perceptions, knowing the knowledge and experiencing the experiences? Is that perceiver, is that knower, is that experiencer one or different? If I am the body, who is aware of my body? If I am my thoughts, who is aware of the thoughts coming and going? If I am my emotions, who is aware of the emotion arising and passing? That is a fundamental question asked in the Eastern wisdom by all the masters. They reach to a point and they ask, who the hell you are? This points to a witnessing consciousness that is separate from and prior to. Prior to perception, knowledge, and experience. If that witness consciousness, I question, if I am the body who is aware of the body, if I am my thought who is aware of the thoughts coming and going, if I am my emotion who is aware of, so it means that witnessing consciousness, first thing it is separate because it has experienced body, thought, and emotions. Second, it exists prior to the objects of perception, knowledge, and experience. That is what the real self is. And that is what we discover and find in meditation and mindfulness. Another limitation, so we come to a conclusion, the false I and the real I, the self we construct. The self we construct from perceptions, knowledge, and experiences. We are concluding, but we will prove it. You don't need to go. You have to listen to all the episodes. So it's the self we construct from our perception, knowledge, and experiences is called the false I or ego. It is a mental construct, a compilation of rules, memories, and habits, fears, anxiety, pleasure. Real I, pure consciousness, is what remains when all these transient mental constructs are seen through and transcended. It is the unchanging ground of being. That simply is. Aware of all the experiences but not defined by them. We know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experiences is a perfectly valid description of how our ego identity is built and maintained throughout our lives. How long we will continue with that? How long we will continue to suffer? I suffered from the anxiety when I was 20. Still I'm suffering from the anxiety now. Anxiety is an experience of the mind. I am not the mind. I am different and separate from the mind. Because who is the knower of this anxiety is existing prior to I have an anxiety. Simple logic. Put forth by the Eastern wisdom, it explains why we identify with our moods, our past, and our roles, ego. So, from the perspective of the Eastern wisdom, it also serves as an invitation to go deeper, to inquire into the nature of the knower, seer, witness consciousness of these perceptions, knowledge, and experiences. This deeper inquiry leads to a profound realization that our ultimate real self is not the fluctuating content of the mind, but the unchanging eternal consciousness that illuminates all of it. Let's take a statement. We know ourselves by perception, knowledge, and experiences, and rigorously prove and analyze it step by step using examples focusing on how this builds our conventional sense of the self. And then Eastern wisdom proposes a core proposition. Our personal identity, our sense of who I am, is fundamentally different from this mental construct. What is mental construct is the false I built from the continuous stream of sensory data, interpretations, accumulated fact. But yes, we use the raw sensory input as a tool to start the journey of the self-inquiry. So this input is objective and pre-mental interpretation. It simply is. What about the perception, the mind's immediate interpretation? Again, it is the mind's immediate interpretation. And then accumulation, experience is the accumulation of perception. And then what happens? Knowledge formulating belief and narratives about ourselves. But masters of the Eastern wisdom says we need not to stay there. We have to go little further and find the real self behind the mental construct or the conventional self. Through the meditation, we abide in that real self all the time and we find it. Goodbye, thank you for listening, and wait for my third next episode.